Here we go. Today is Sunday, March 6th, 2016, and this is episode 152 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Hello, Mr. Bell. How's your Sunday going?
It is going pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm sad that tomorrow's Monday, but otherwise,
Well, we got to get through Monday to get back to Friday again.
That's true. You speak true.
Yeah. So just before we get started, the thoughts and opinions we express on this show are ours and do not represent those of our employers. And before we do get started tonight, I did want to make another shout out to Hack in the Box Amsterdam, which is happening May 23rd through 27th of this year in Amsterdam, of all places. Fancy that being
lovely, scenic, historic Amsterdam.
Exactly. That's right. Uh-huh. And underwater.
Well,
below sea level. How about? Let's see.
Now you're going to make people think they have to hold their breath to go to the conference. Way to mislead everybody. It's not underwater.
It's not underwater. It's whatever.
I mean, unless you consider the water as the, vapor content in the air above the city.
Then we're all underwater then.
That's true.
So anyway, as I said, the conference is being held the 23rd to the 27th of May. You can you can find a link to the website to buy tickets in our show notes. And if you mention Defensive Security as the coupon code, you'll get 10% off. So that's pretty good. There are the agenda is posted, and I'll tell you, it looks really, really quite good. So if you are in the area, I highly recommend you go.
One of these years we will have to go.
Absolutely.
But not this year.
Not this year. It is it's a little hard to it's hard to get time off and fit it in the budget to get out there. But anyway, enough about that. Moving on to our stories. Our first story tonight comes from the Intel Security Advanced Threat Research Team. And the title is Targeted Ransomware No Longer a Future Threat.
And just a warning, this is actually a link to a PDF file, so don't freak out. I mean, maybe freak out a little, but...
Yeah, it is a little interesting that...
it is.
Security researchers do choose PDFs as... I mean, I guess it's better than like SWF, right? But...
I don't know. I think a lot of that's driven by marketing folks.
I suppose. Yeah.
For whatever reason.
Anyway, the deal here is this kind of goes along with something we've been talking about for the last couple of episodes, and that is ransomware that's really targeted more at an organization than at an individual. And so this PDF actually describes a decomposition and analysis of a piece of malware, a piece of ransomware, and the attack techniques used by a group against an unnamed victim. And there's lots of details in here, but basically the takeaways are that, number one, it's not very clear what the initial point of intrusion was. They don't actually discuss that. Number two, they actually do a pretty interesting analysis which shows that the attacker apparently was manually interacting with this and doing a somewhat manual installation. So this wasn't like one big scripted thing, partially scripted. But basically, the attacker ran an Active Directory tool to dump members of the domain. They ran a script, just basically a shell script, to identify systems that the system they were operating from internally had connectivity to. So basically they were performing a ping test. And once they did that, they started copying. Well, first off, they generated a public and private key pair, which obviously the private key was up in the cloud, and then they copied the public key and the actual cryptoware to all of the systems that this compromised host they were operating from had access to, and they basically were just using UNC, the C dollar, our lovely favorite C dollar share, and copying the like I said, the public key and the malware to all of those hosts, and then they used PSExec, our friend PSExec, to actually launch the ransomware on each of those hosts. So, one of the things they actually don't mention it in here. Down at the very bottom of the article, they talk about some mitigations, which just has the normal patch your system in a timely manner and use antivirus and that sort of thing.
Oh, don't forget the robust backup and recovery strategy.
Well, I can agree with that.
Right.
But a lot of your network tools these days, like network IPSs and whatnot, have the ability to detect and block PSExec traffic, and I do know that PSExec is a commonly used thing in some environments. However, there is probably an opportunity to limit where it's coming from, and so you probably shouldn't be seeing PSExec traffic coming from your receptionist's computer. I'm just saying.
It's true. Unless she's kind of wearing two hats, receptionist / IT admin.
Yeah.
But in general, yes, you should be able to whitelist and know where those sort of commands are coming from, and anything else should be suspicious.
Right. But I think the takeaway is this is just another indication of the like Swell called the militarization of ransomware.
It's true. I did pick up something interesting too in the story that I wanted to bring up, which was, I don't know, probably 3/4 of the way through, they were talking about the actual I guess, communication to the victim of how to get their files back. And in essence, it sent them to a WordPress site that was maintained by the bad guys. So, which was followsec7.wordpress.com. So that was the note on the desktop to go to that website, and if they follow it, they'll eventually get information about how to pay the 1.5 Bitcoin and all that jazz. Now, here's the interesting thing: that WordPress site got shut down by WordPress, basically, and they moved to another one. But that kind of brings up an interesting ethical question to me, which is, without getting into the debate of whether you should or should not be paying for getting your ransom files back, if you choose to, this particular layout, once that site shut down, depending on the timing of the compromise and such, you just lost your opportunity to buy back your files if you really wanted to, based on WordPress or somebody else making that determination, which is kind of an interesting problem.
Yeah. We saw this back a couple of years ago when ransomware was primarily a consumer type problem. There were a lot of command and control shutdowns, and at the time I remember reading a lot of consternation about leaving the victims kind of high and dry.
Right.
And now this is a bit different thing, because we're actually seeing, I would say, you just have to read the InfoSec news, and you'll see on a almost daily basis now some government entity or hospital, whatever, paying the ransom. Right? This is becoming a common thing, and if you suddenly take away that opportunity, I think it's not great, right? But
yeah, there's no good option at this point. But I'm just bringing up that it's an interesting ethical dilemma of whether or not you take that site down, given the circumstance involved of a strongly encrypted file that there's no other way to recover it. Maybe you choose to pay, and here you've got a third party sort of breaking that communication chain. Now, in some ways, you could say this is a bad design by the bad guys to have it be dependent upon a specific site that could be easily disabled. But And not everybody does this. A lot of them do it over email or do it just by drop a Bitcoin, drop to a Bitcoin wallet address, that kind of stuff that isn't dependent on this sort of centralized blog site. But anyway, I just thought it was interesting from an ethical dilemma standpoint of what would you do kind of thing if you were, the WordPress guys.
Yeah, it's I mean, obviously, it's a simple decision for them, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's a malicious actor operating in their environment. It gets more complicated if you're if you're the party that's been hosed. And by the way, I don't have a link to it right now, but I in preparation for this show, I did read I think it was the city of um, Melrose. I don't remember exactly where that's at, but the police department, one of their detectives got crypto lockered, and apparently it didn't impact their infrastructure. It really just crypto lockered this detective's laptop, and they did have backups of some things, but apparently there were a lot of like pictures and images that were used or going to be used in upcoming criminal cases that they didn't have backups for. And so it was just kind of a humorous story about the one of the detectives talking about the police chief. He and the police chief going to meet a Bitcoin broker at the Panera Bread to to buy a Bitcoin for $500 or whatever to recover this guy's files. So I really think this is becoming just an unfortunately common thing, and I would dare say one of the more pressing things as defenders, we've got to make sure we have a good game plan, either both to defend and then to respond to.
Yeah, agreed. And once again, this is one of those things of having a plan ahead of time is going to put you in a far better position, and than trying to come up with a plan after it happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of like with DDoS and other things, the stigma associated with getting crypto lacquered is probably gone down quite a lot because there's just been so many.
Yeah, we've become a little desensitized to it we're not blaming the victim as much as we probably used to.
Right, exactly. Let's see. So our next story, and this was just an interesting little flap that happened over the past week with 1Password, and so actually, and it's interesting because this is the second time this happened on this particular bug. But there was a security researcher whose blog we can't actually find right now. I'm not exactly sure if it was taken down or what. But effectively, the story, and this I'm going based on recollection, but the story was this person was poking around on his Mac and looking at what services he had listening on the network, and he noticed that there were some listeners on his bound to his local the loopback interface, and he didn't recognize what they were. He didn't think there was anything that should have been there, so he started TCP dump session, just looking to see what was there. And
By the way, all good. We like this. This
yeah,
is how you should. Yeah, it's
yeah.
all good research. Yeah.
And lo and behold, at some point, while he's using his computer, he sees unencrypted passwords going, flowing through his loopback interface. And what it turns out is that this person was using 1Password, the password manager, 1Password, and effectively, the traffic he was seeing was a call from the browser plugin to the 1Password application to request the password and then respond back so that the browser could autofill the username and password, and that kind of lit a firestorm of
Indeed.
of activity and consternation and
The Twitters were a buzzer.
yeah, and interestingly, this is, like I said, this I do remember this coming up almost a year ago, and in fact, I think it was in June of last year. We will put a response from 1Password, but basically 1Password's perspective is that if you want this to work like like that, where you have the ability to feed in passwords into your browser forms, you effectively have no real choice. They can do some obfuscation, but it's just obfuscation. There apparently isn't really any provisions to do any kind of a actual crypto between the 1Password application and the browser without some really complicated setup that would be destroyed every time there was some kind of an update with the browser or what have you. And so I think they recognize that there's a problem. But the one thing that kind of came up quite often is that in order to exploit this vulnerability, you basically, an attacker would effectively have to be a local administrator or root on your system, and at which point the opportunities for them to get your passwords are numerous,
Right.
including keyloggers and lots of other opportunities. So probably not the most pressing thing to worry about, but
No, I really felt this was much ado about nothing personally. And so here is kind of my take, and you definitely hit on some of the points I was going to say as well. But the researcher guy found something interesting, and he kind of threw it out there to the world. And I think 1Password did a pretty decent job of saying, yeah, we know about this. This is a design choice, and here's the trade-offs involved and why. But that often doesn't get as much press as the initial splashy display of, oh my God, there's clear passwords floating around. But you said it. At some point, you've got to trust something. And if you're punching in passwords manually, and that box is already compromised, the same level of access is there to capture those passwords as you type them in. Unless you're using pure two-factor or some sort of certificate authentication, if you're using static passwords of any variety, they're going to get captured. If your box is compromised, whether it's being fed by you personally or being fed by some sort of browser plugin or third-party application, because it has to interact, it has to basically fake it is a user. It has to type it in essence. We don't have API calls to, do end-to-end encryption on this sort of stuff. And even if we did, it still would be in memory. It's still, look, if your box is owned, your box is owned. So all that being said, the advantages and the security advantages of using something like a 1Password or other password manager, I think far outweigh the risks, far outweigh. Are there risks involved? Absolutely. Could you have all of your passwords compromised at once if somebody were to, break your master password or something like that? Absolutely. However, having random, unique passwords and managed centrally for all of your sites is a far bigger risk reduction and net gain in risk reduction than the risk increase of using something like Password Manager. I will be honest, I don't use 1Password. I use a competitor, but I feel the same way about 1Password as I do the one I use. It just happened to be the one I started using. I'm too lazy to switch. But and we do have some friends of the show who happen to work for 1Password, but that's not influencing my opinion. I honestly believe that a lot more people could and should be using password managers, and then they could easily get away from reusing the same password in every site, amongst other reasons. So anyway, I get that this guy thought he stumbled onto something, and he wasn't the first, by the way. And I'm not blaming him. I mean, it's good that people are looking and researching, but I really think the press coverage of this was much ado about nothing, as I said before, and also somewhat one-sided and uninformed. And I did want to kind of point to the, very factually and technically interesting, if you will, rebuttal or explanation coming from 1Password. And, just remind folks that at the end of the day, the same and worse abilities exist if somebody can monitor your local loopback.
Yeah, exactly. The reason I thought it was worth bringing up is that we in security we tend to fall into this trap of thinking things are bad, or substandard, and I thought it worth having the discussion because I think there's still a tremendous amount of value, as you just mentioned, right, in password managers that far outweigh the downside. I mean, all this stuff is a trade-off. Yes, two-factor authentication would be a much better way to go. However, in many cases, for either the sites you use don't support it, or for many other reasons, a password manager just makes a lot more sense. So
Yeah.
um, feel free to flame us and tell us how you think. info@defensivesecurity.org. I'm not a terribly mean. I am a little mean. My kids say that I'm mean, but
Well, of course they do. They're your kids.
right. So moving on to our final story, and this is a big one actually. Verizon released a new report, and not only is it new for 2015, it's actually a new. I think this is an actual new report that they have not released before. And they call it their Data Breach Digest. So this is different than their investigation report. It's different than the DBIR. This is
Right.
This is really a different thing.
And we are big fans of the DBIR, by the way.
Yes.
Incredibly useful and something that we highly recommend. And I will, spoiler warning, say I'm now a big fan of the Data Breach Digest report.
So just for those of you who are familiar with the DBIR, this is a different animal in that whereas the DBIR is really a kind of a meta-analysis of trends and things like that. This is a dissection with a somewhat detailed example of a number of different common, I would say what Verizon considers the most common attack techniques. And so from that perspective, I thought this was really a great thing for the industry because like I said, they have taken I think the top 18. I'm trying to find the exact number. I think it's the top 18 attack techniques, and they came up with examples, allegedly of their firsthand experience.
So a little background for those who may not know. Verizon, the telco company, also has a very large and well-respected, security incident response team. So I was trying to avoid using the word cyber there. But quoting from the report, that the risk team, as they call it, performs cyber investigations for hundreds of commercial enterprises and government agencies annually across the globe. In 2015, they did more than 500 cybersecurity incidents responses occurring in over 40 countries. So they're pretty experienced. And as Jerry was saying, the goal here is they look in aggregate at what are the top scenarios, and then they picked representative scenarios to tell the story of in the report with some obfuscation data and some anonymization to make sure that they're not giving away anything. But it's pretty interesting. It's as they put it, it's kind of like doing a ride along with their incident response team.
Yeah, and I think this is really valuable both for IT security people, but also for just IT people generally, to be able to see how IT is failing at the hands of attackers, and it's not always obvious exactly how that's happening. So I think this is a really good thing for people to read and take some lessons for. And they do not only describe the situation, but they talk about how the organization remediated whatever thing happened, and then what the lessons were. So it's
and of course recommendations to avoid getting hit by that as well.
Right, and it's 84 pages, so we're not going to do justice to this thing in a podcast. So it is definitely worth your time to read. But there are some things that I thought we can talk about here. Some of the most interesting things I picked out reading through this was that in their experience, in Verizon's experience, 80% of breaches in some way, shape, or form involve the use of weak, stolen, default, or easily guessed passwords, which should probably not come as a big surprise. But it is, I guess, it's a higher percentage than I was thinking it would be, and so it's a good opportunity to underscore the importance of password hygiene and things like two-factor authentication.
Yeah, certainly. One that I picked out, quoting early in the report, is something pretty interesting to me. Quote, many data breach victims believe they're in isolation dealing with sophisticated tactics and zero-day malware never seen before. We see otherwise, we being Verizon, not you and me. Continuing, to us, few breaches are unique. In fact, our Varus research indicates that at any given point in time, a small number of breach scenarios compromise the vast majority of incidents we investigate. There is tremendous commonality in real-world cyber attacks. In fact, according to our risk team incident dataset over the previous years, just 12 scenarios represent over 60% of our investigations. Now, why I think that's huge is we chase these big nation-state pocket case ideas because they're sexy and cool, but really want to raise the bar. What this is telling us is these are the common ways the bad guys are coming after us. Address these first, and you're going to hit a good chunk of the ways you might get breached.
Right. Right. And including some nation state style attacks too.
Of course, there's nothing that stops a nation state from using a simpler technique.
Right.
And vice versa. Nothing to stop a criminal organization from using a nation state technique, right? This is the problem with the common, I think nation state is a term I'd like to stop using. I think it's a level of sophistication that we should be talking about.
Yes.
Right.
Agreed.
And because the implication is that a nation state has the financing focus, and discipline to have a much higher level of sophistication in their attack. But as we've seen over and over again, I don't need a really sophisticated attack most of the time. I need an attack just sophisticated enough.
Right.
So why burn my really awesome 0-day if I don't have to, regardless of who I am?
Exactly. And to carry that on, like the Syrian Electronic Army is a nation state actor who phishes people. I mean, they literally send you phishing emails to get your password.
Why? Because it works.
Because it works. And so that's a nation state attack, right?
In fact, that leads into the next quote I pulled out of the report. From the report, in our entire corpus of data breaches, we witnessed social tactics being used in around 20% of confirmed data breaches.
Right.
Which, is huge. And if they look at the frequency over the last couple of years, it's 30% of data breaches use some sort of social tactic. While there are many tactics that can be unleashed to manipulate people, the top three: phishing, 72%, pretexting, 16%, and bribery solicitation, 10%. So again, phishing, incredibly effective.
Yeah, and continuing to be, despite our continued training.
And one other tidbit on that is that, again, quoting from the report, as one would expect, email is the primary means of communication to the target, 72% of the time, followed by in-person deception, 18%, and phone calls, 12%, with a small overlap across the three means of communication. Social actions are typically part of a blended attack, with malware also present in 85% of data breaches and hacking found in 50% involving the human element.
Yep. So that dovetails into one of their the actual first case they have describes hypothetical. It's not hypothetical, right? But a customer that had a director of engineering who apparently wasn't very happy with his job and had been communicating with a recruiter, apparently using his work computer.
A recruiter via LinkedIn.
Via LinkedIn, right? Yeah.
Yep.
And this recruiter, apparently the recruiter and this person had built a rapport over some time, and this person eventually, the engineering person ended up eventually opening up a document, which, of course, no surprise, had some malware, which ended up stealing some key information and kind of backing up, doing the Quentin Tarantino thing, right? The customer had noticed that another company in a different country had released a product that physically looked very similar to something that they had just released or were about to release, and it apparently was some like non-trivial piece of construction equipment. And so kind of unlikely to be a coincidence. And so they started this investigation, found out that, it was apparently this person got some malware in their system. But the attacker uh, they used. I mean, they basically conned this guy, right? They figured out who in the organization, probably by looking at LinkedIn, were most likely to have access to the plans that they would want. And so then they started going after him under the pretext of being a recruiter who had a sweet looking job for this person.
And it wasn't, by the way, the first job description that was sent. The way I read the report, there was multiple interactions before the actual malware was sent.
Right, right.
So it was definitely a long and uh, but, first of all, don't look for another job on your work computer, guys. That's just kind of 101 stuff.
If you're going to get owned at work, don't make it doing something like that.
Seriously. And one of the recommendations they came away with, which is one that I think is a pain in the ass, but one we see over and over again as something that's helpful, is the engineers who work with this design data and critical important data now have a dedicated system that they do their engineering work on, which no longer has email or web access. So they've got two boxes basically. They've got their main box that they do their actual work on, and they've got this other box that allows them to do email and web and that sort of stuff. And there's so many times that segregation of duties would have saved people's bacon. But it's expensive in time and complexity. It's annoying to the users because they've got to swap back and forth. Let's say they wanted to email something back and forth after working on it. It's rare that we see that implemented, but man, does it sound like something that would save a lot of save them a lot of heartburn. Or whether they set up like a VDI jump box for getting to critical data. It's something we should be looking at more, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Until we get, until we get to the point where our workstations are more intrinsically trustable.
Yeah, because that's going to happen.
Well, I know we don't seem to be on a trajectory for that to happen. We're going to have to get creative with stuff like that. And this is something, by the way, that I've thought a lot about. And one of the concerns I have with the VDI type model is that you really want to contain that more risky stuff into a off into the corner, rather than having it potentially pollute your whole computer. Because if your computer gets a rat and you have to VDI into a system that's kind of in a clean room, that rat is still potentially providing access, even just through that VDI. So even if it's just screen captures.
Agreed. Right? Although I would say one of the advantages of VDI is that you can snapshot, rollback snapshots, blow away and rebuild the infrastructure incredibly quickly and on a nightly basis.
I'm definitely not. I mean, I'm in concept, I'm in favor of it.
Yeah.
I guess my point is, we really have to think about if we're making the most effective use in how we are having people interact with it. And I do think that the solution they had is this company came up with, which was providing the engineering person or people. I'm assuming that guy didn't keep his job. I don't know. They didn't cover that part, but the remaining engineers had multiple computers, and we've talked about this time and time again. That makes sense whether it's in the context of this person who's working with blueprints, or in the context of a financial person who's making bank transfers, or it's in the context of your IT administrators who are performing domain admin activities. And you can find many kinds of use cases like that where you really, really, really want to protect the integrity of that system because it has the ability to really hose you.
Agreed. Absolutely.
And that kind of goes to their next one, which the very next case, which was also pretty interesting, another phishing case.
Yeah, I had some interesting thoughts on this too, but please go ahead, lay it out.
Yeah. So it was a bank. I believe this person, it was let's say a bank manager working at a branch office, and this person had he she, I believe, was one of two people at the branch who had the authority to perform transfers using this particular application used by the Federal Reserve, or that, I don't exactly understand all of the puts and takes, but in any event, she had access to make some transfers, money transfers to this one application. The I believe it was the Federal Reserve Bank actually detected that there were unusually large transfers of money happening, or attempting to be, transferred, and notified the bank. And so the bank ended up not actually losing any money, but kind of working backwards, what they found was that this bank manager had received an email purporting to be from the bank's corporate CIO, congratulating her and thanking her for her and her team's, awesome participation and assistance with with the CIO's programs. And she was the model, or her group was the model of how how the CIO and the business should be working together, and just kind of buttering her up. And then there was a link that she clicked, which of course installed some malware, apparently a variant of Zeus, in fact. And then the attackers ended up using that to initiate the transfers. And of course, the CIO was like, I don't even know who this person is. I didn't send her anything like that.
It was interesting too that a couple key takeaways I had. 5.3 million was the requested amount in the total of all the transfers. And if it hadn't been that much, they might have gotten away with it, first off, which is interesting.
Yes.
Because it triggered a volumetric alert at the Fed that it was that big. The other thing that I thought interesting was the reason Verizon got involved is the bank's cyber insurance carrier sent them to Verizon. So It kind of goes back to something we've talked about on some of the other shows of the cyber insurance carrier getting more deeply involved in some of the day-to-day sort of instant response stuff. One quote in here I thought was brilliant and really summed up the problem we're dealing with right now that I wanted to call out, which was, quote, threat actors who engage in social engineering attacks do it because they know that the human element is the weakest link in any information security strategy. They often take advantage of their targeted victim's sense of curiosity and psychology in order to gain access to sensitive data. In this particular case, the victim employee was showered with compliments by a company executive and then asked to click an innocent-looking hyperlink. Now, as it turns out, this was obviously, as you could probably guess, a spoofed email that came from the outside, but had all the right look and feel to be believable. And in fact, this particular person who clicked on it never doubted that it was real until much later during the investigation.
Right.
And the other thing that's interesting is I know a number of organizations that have internal sort of attaboy systems that are often done over email and often have a link to a third-party site. That's sort of like an e-card, if you will, of so-and-so said you did a good job. Click here to see what they say. And it's promoted within that organization as a way to show appreciation and, kind of morale building in the organization. But it's, it builds a completely plausible scenario just like this to be exploited.
Yeah, and it's probably not all that hard for someone to to work to target someone else in the organization to find a template for one of those notifications.
Yeah,
and then use that to go fish someone else.
Especially in a large organization, a lot of times it's an outsourced third party that's doing the sort of appreciation program. And I've seen people talk about it on their LinkedIn. So that organization uses that third party.
Right.
Now you know what template to duplicate.
Right.
And it's a tough one because what are you going to go to senior managers and say, shut this down, you're training people to click on things. They're going to go, okay, you're not getting an e-card this week, right? I mean, it's
no turkey for you this year.
I mean, there's a value to having these sorts of appreciation programs and such in an organization. So it's a tough one to just say, just shut it down. And one of the recommendations that Verizon mentions, and it's something that we hear over and over and over and over and over and over about phishing, is employees need to be constantly sensitized and trained through security awareness programs to be extra vigilant regarding their actions. But here's the thing. If I'm duplicating a known application look and feel in your environment, how the hell is a user going to detect that? You've got to have something at a technical level to realize that this is a spoofed email coming in from the outside or something. Or the other thing is, multi-factor authentication, so that passwords just can't be captured and reused that easily on critical apps, which makes sense to me. But
yep, I think
fascinating case.
it is, and I think it goes back to the previous point that if you have people making $5.3 million transactions, they should probably not be doing that on the same computer that they're checking their email and LinkedIn and whatnot. And I know that that's a painful thing to say, but this is becoming a real problem. And how many times do you have to lose $5 million for it to become worthwhile?
At least 3 or 4.
Yeah, true.
I mean,
so they go on to describe a bunch of other scenarios. The next one was related to extortion, where an attacker basically said, "Hey, I have all have a ton of your customer transaction data," and the customer really or the vendor had no real conception of how that could have happened. Turned out it was the attacker had used a direct object reference vulnerability in their web application to get the basically like the receipt of orders, and over the course of a couple of weeks had downloaded like something like 1.5 million customer order records. So and then in that particular case, the customer chose to go forward preemptively because the attacker was trying to, like I said, perform some extortion, saying, I will, for the low price of, tens of thousands of dollars, I will not release this data. So the company figured out how they got the data. They went public to their customers and whoever else and said, hey, this is what happened. And then they shut off their system and rebuilt it from the ground up. So interesting, it's something to think about too. How, are you generally going to be opposed to paying ransoms? Good thing to figure out.
One thing that the takeaway I had there that I liked a lot was sorry, let me find my notes real quick here. Unprepared. They had a really good thing about this, but basically that they pulled in a multi team, including their legal, their
right.
marketing.
Yeah, the victim incorporated non-technical business units, for example, public relations, legal, etc., to its overall response to the incident and disclosed the data breach on its own terms. In the end, the victim took complete ownership of his data breach experience and used it as an opportunity to come out stronger and more secure on the other side. So,
did you want to talk about Bob, the outsourcer?
Our friend Bob, back when Bob was still talking to me,
he'll be, it'll be okay. He'll get over it.
He described a very similar situation to this that actually happened to him. But anyhow, so yes, they have a little inset that describes Bob, the force multiplier, and so this particular organization apparently was like an in-person, primarily an on-site organization, but they had started allowing some of their employees to work at home occasionally. In particular, their application developers, and so. Coincidentally, the IT team has started looking at their VPN concentrator logs, and lo and behold, they find out that one of the accounts is logging in from Asia.
Well, clearly two-factor authentication would solve that.
Yes, it certainly would.
Right.
And they did, in fact, have two-factor authentication.
Well, now I'm puzzled.
Yes, and so as they describe it, the person whose ID or whose VPN account was logged in at the time was actually on site at his desk.
Well, now it's just a straight up mystery. So the logs show him logging in from China during the workday with a rotating key fob token, probably like an RSA or something similar, and yet he's there.
That's right.
Mm,
Plot thickens.
it does.
So, and by the way, Bob, this person named Bob, right? He apparently was a highly productive developer. He got very good reviews. It was claimed that he was the most productive developer in the whole building. They said.
He was earning several $100,000 a year,
Yes.
and his reviews for the past several years in a row received excellent marks. His code was clean and well written and submitted in a timely fashion.
Yes. And as it turns out, Bob had outsourced his job to China. So basically, Verizon apparently took a forensic image of this person's computer and found out that on an average day, he would surf for a few hours in the morning on Reddit. He would take an early lunch. He would do some eBay stuff after lunch. He would then move on to Facebook and LinkedIn. He would end his day with a summary email to management, I guess describing what the people in China had accomplished, and then he would go home.
So, from the article, it looks like he just FedExed his token to Asia, paid this third-party contractor $50K a year, and I think he's onto something. Actually, I think he's a hell of a project manager, if you ask me.
He's certainly enterprising. There's no doubt. But it gets better because apparently this was not the only job he had at the same time. So apparently it's not exactly enumerated here, but there's an allegation that he had at least a couple of other jobs working at the same time where this company in China was facilitating the work. So he was basically in aggregate, right, or net was he was taking a very small, relatively small portion of his paycheck and paying this development company in China to do his work. And so
somebody read the 4-Hour Work Week, if you ask me.
That's right. So yeah, it's watch out for that stuff.
Well, you know what it does though is it all joking aside, let's take a step back and look at this. There was an assumption that two-factor authentication absolved most of the password reuse problems coming in over the VPN. And so here's a brilliant example of what assumptions are we taking into our environment of where our risks and our threats are coming from.
Yeah.
Now, in all honesty, probably, this third party in China was doing good work and they weren't maybe necessarily a risk, but still, this was not sanctioned by management and still. So, looking at your logs, examining for odd things is always key. But a challenge to that is having people with enough time to go do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, if you do ever really get comfortable with two-factor, I invite you to go to images.google.com and search for two-factor webcam.
Yes.
Yes, it's very enlightening.
Most of it will not be porn. I'll just that's warning. Most will not be porn. In case
some of it will be, but
of course, I mean
the first few hits are pretty funny though.
Yes.
Just pay attention to the first hit and you'll be fine. Let's see. So moving on, there was another case related to insider threats where an employee, I guess a mid-level manager, had been bragging about having access to the CEO's email, and it was kind of a contentious time because they were going through some business changes, and I think they were going through an acquisition, and they were trying to get people to stay on with retention packages and things like that. So those are always very difficult for employees, but not really clear exactly how that played into the scenario here. But basically, what ended up happening was this company brought in Verizon to do an analysis, and if they basically looked at the CEO's computer and they looked at this person's computer, and they couldn't figure out, and they looked at the email server, and they couldn't figure out what the heck was going on. Turns out that the company had a anti-spam spam filter server, which had the ability to log all incoming and outgoing emails, and that of course was turned on. And the IT administrator, one of the IT administrators who had access to that system, was personal friends with this mid-level manager and had given that mid-level manager his ID and password to use. And so, the forensic analysis basically found all of this out, and both the IT person and the mid-level manager were thrown out on their keisters. But I think that the point there is, number one, collusion, and two-factor authentication may have helped, although it won't help the webcam effect or the mailing it to China type thing. But that's you have to. I think you really have to look for, especially in times of corporate strife like that. You've really got to watch how people are reacting, right? And then again, there's not a lot of indications. I have had some personal experience with these sorts of things, and unfortunately, the people who you trust most in your IT organization, sometimes, they're people too, right? And you really have to consider that those people also can be either intentional or unintentional threat actors. So
it's true.
Let's see, what other fun things did they have to say? There was a partner. They described a business partner of a gas station franchise of gas stations who had outsourced support of their point of sale systems to a company, and they kept they kept getting the credit cards compromised, and couldn't quite figure out what was going on. There really was no clear indication what was going on. There was no skimmers. There was no evidence of unauthorized access. Turns out that one of the employees of the firm that they've outsourced the management of the point of sale terminals was in the middle of the night logging in and collecting card data, and doing it in a very roundabout way. I mean, like resetting the date and time on the system, and
to like 2 years ahead to somehow avoid logging.
Right.
Ineffectively, by the way,
very ineffectively. And he would go in the middle of the night to his company, the outsourcer, and would actually log into his manager's computer instead of his own computer, and was performing the nefarious activity. But anyway, that was an interesting one. They describe they have some discussion about USB attacks, and I guess I had kind of thought that USB attacks were kind of passé, but they point out that no, they're still alive and well as long as they're messaged properly. So they talk about a case of a motion picture executive getting socially engineered to running some application on a USB drive, and it came with a letterhead, and it was purported to be a press kit for an upcoming movie, and so interesting stuff there.
A couple of things on that I wanted to point
go ahead.
Three, really. One, the press kit looked just like another press kit from the industry, so clearly somebody did their homework. Two, when the guy first put the USB in and looked at the movie trailer, that's when it dropped the malware, and the malware did a call out to a CNC box. Their proxy dropped it and logged it.
Right.
But the connection alert was one of many alerts that were forwarded to a security analyst every day. Since it was blocked access to a blacklisted IP, the analyst didn't chalk it up as a success and moved on. This is a common problem. I don't know how to solve it, but it is a big deal. This is something where we've seen this over and over again. In hindsight, it's perfectly obvious, but in the moment, you get some random alert that is a little tiny piece of data that may mean a lot more than it seems like.
Well, I mean, this is the signal and the noise problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
Um, and I don't know how to deal with that because we don't have the people to go chase all this stuff down. We really don't. And so it's an interesting thing to think about, though. The third one I thought was really interesting from this particular case study, and I know we're getting long on the hour here, but quote, some people may believe that they're safe from USB flash drives attacks because their DLP software blocks said devices, as is, perhaps their various settings on the computer or whatever. However, unfortunately, DLP and other devices, I'm inserting the and other devices and other techniques, can't block all USB devices without making systems unusable. For example, a USB device claiming to be a keyboard human interface device can bypass DLP and type, quote unquote, scripted keystrokes at 1,000 words per minute. It acts just like a keyboard and basically gives keyboard access to the threat actor. So, with easy-to-use tools to load custom payloads on the device, anything is possible. So, for you sitting there all smug, fat, dumb, and happy, thinking, that's all right, we've turned off USB file permissions. Guess what, kids? USB is universal. So, here's a great example of all they have to do is masquerade like a keyboard, and because keyboards plug into USB, you're good to go.
Yeah, there's there's been a lot of attacks using USBs in non-conventional ways. I mean, there's I can't remember the name of it right now, but there was a big flap about using embedded microcontrollers to emulate just that, right? So you can actually make it in the form factor of a USB storage device, but just like you said, it has a little radio and it emulates the head, right? The human interface, mouse and keyboard, which is not a great thing. The other common one. And it depends on how you configure your DLP and operating system, whether or not this will be effective. But there's a lot of instructions for certain kinds of USB devices. You can actually reprogram them to present themselves as CD-ROM drives.
Sure.
So the operating system thinks that it's actually a CD-ROM drive instead of a flash drive. So, there's lots of creative ways. Don't get too comfortable. Certainly, as with everything, you're probably not going to get, you're probably unlikely to get the most sophisticated attacker coming after you, but, you don't want to fall into the trap of thinking that you're completely solid because you've disabled mass storage USB devices. Boy, there's a lot of other good ones. I'm trying to think of what other, just looking through the list here.
I think the takeaway is everybody should go read it.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't leave your AS400 sitting out wide open on the internet with credentials to log in hidden in an INI file on one of your websites. That's a good one.
Crazy talk.
Let's see. Your content management systems are going to be compromised. Rats are bad. DNS tunneling is hard to track down. Ransomware is a problem, and sophisticated malware can be really hard to track down. And it's really a great report. Highly recommend you read it. Think about how you might integrate the lessons into your own program. That's, if nothing else, by the way, that's what I want out of this podcast, is for people to be able to look at the average story like this and think critically about it. What does this mean to me? Does this tell me anything new? So,
indeed. And here's the thing I'll say too, is that it's really easy for folks like us and folks like Verizon to say, here's what you need to do. Actually executing it in your organization is sometimes incredibly difficult. But don't give up. Sometimes it takes a lot of communication and a lot of tactful pressure and gentle persuasion to affect change. But it's on us to affect that change.
Yeah, and I think the bigger thing too is just being exposed to the ways this stuff is happening so that you're not caught by surprise.
Yep.
There's a lot of value in that. So anyway, that is the show for this week. We appreciate everyone's time. Hopefully you find this useful. And if you do, by the way, give us some love on iTunes. We really enjoy that. Tell a friend. Love that too. Thank you for listening again, and we will talk again next week. just a reminder, you can find links to the stories we talked about tonight on our website, www.defensivesecurity.org. You can follow the show on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Kellett on Twitter at Lurg and me on Twitter at MaliciousLincoln. With that, we'll talk again next week.
Have a great week, everybody. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. There's two types of people in this world.
Those who think we're funny and those who are wrong?
Yes, you got it. Well, I'm sure there'll be some big data and some threat intelligence.
Absolutely. And probably some advanced APT defense tools, I imagine.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.